Hello, friends. I'm finally writing a book to codify the basis for my signature Mike Rochelle and Associates Corporate Leadership Accelerator course. And I need an upvote from you to gain favorable publishing status. It is co-titled Growing the Next Version of You, the LeadershipN Accelerator, a journey for growing success in life, love, and leadership. Greetings and welcome to the Growing the Next Version of You show. Every week or so, I get together with thought leaders and we talk about the trends that are happening in the world, and we think of life from a mind, body, and spirit perspective, because that's what servant leaders do. So join me. Well, hello, friends. This is Mike Rochelle here on Growing the Next Version of You. And I happen to be with a good friend of mine, Ivey, who's the Chief Information Officer at Carollo Engineering and also a new school board member is it Hamilton ISD?
Hamilton ISD.
Hamilton ISD in Central Texas.
Go Bulldogs.
All right. Very good. Well, Andy, it's great to have you on the show. We've done a lot together from leadership development and the Society for Information Management, Association for Business Technology Professionals, other industry events in the area. But I'm really anxious to get to know you better today. And I wanted to throw it to you immediately and just talk about what are the 2 or 3 top of mind things that you're sharing with your team and with those that you care about?
Yeah, so the number one is a thing that I think most IT people would never think to talk about. And it's something that doesn't really have anything to do with technology. It's burnout. So we felt like we were seeing some of our staff not be fully engaged after we went remote. And it didn't happen suddenly like I think you would expect. It happened really slowly, where we, over the course of 3 years now, you started to feel like, wait a minute, they're not as responsive as they were a year ago, 2 years ago. And so you could automatically think, oh, well, they've checked out. It's their fault. Something's, they've done something wrong. You need to punish them or something to get them back in. And it was Gartner, of all people, who were like, hey, man, this could be burnout. And like, you could be suffering from it too. And I'm like, not me, I'm bulletproof. And sure enough, I started to research what is burnout. And it turned out I didn't know what it was. And as I figured out what burnout was and how it's not stress, it's very different than stress. It's not an acute event. It's like a building over time of a lot of small things that really could entirely be outside of work. And yet you're bringing your burnout to work. And so I just took what was a prepared presentation from Gartner on what is burnout and provided it to my team. And all the tools on dealing with burnout were the same tools that we were told to use when we went remote during COVID. So it is, hey, man, you're going to be task switching constantly. So what you need to do is go into Outlook and just turn off your email notifications so they don't bother you while you're working. Set aside time in your day where you're going to have focus time and block that out on your calendar. Block out your lunch on your calendar so you get a lunch.
You get to eat.
Yes, otherwise everyone's going to take your lunch. And what I do is I just block out those times as tentative, to where you're sort of discouraged to use those blocks, but if you have to, you can, and it works. So I get usually a lunch each day and maybe focus time. And there's tools built into Outlook that tell you about focus time and that encourage you to do it, encourage you to follow up with people. And then that applies to your smartphone too. And so we started telling people, hey man, go into Teams and mark yourself where you're not getting notifications after 5 o'clock unless it's from maybe a core group of people. Same with your personal contacts, like after 9 p.m., unless you're a starred contact, you've got to call me twice. And these are all features built. So all we did is we bubbled up all these technology features built into Android, built into iPhone, built into Microsoft tools, because we're a Microsoft shop. And just said, hey, use these tools. And also, here's what burnout is. And by the way, it's okay to talk about this. And we did that once. And in our all hands meeting, I spent about an hour on it. And I had probably 3 or 4 people call me individually and say, thank you for talking about that.
No.
Now, if you've ever led a large team, people don't call and thank you for your topics after meetings. So I was like, oh, wait, I may have been onto something here. And this was all something I never wanted to talk about and was kind of encouraged or almost forced to by Gartner, who we have a relationship with. And they repeatedly brought it up to the point I was annoyed and just wanted them to go away. And it turned out they were right. And I think they saw it in me in our engagements. That I'm like, hey, you're showing signs of burnout. And I think I was. And so we ended up doing another meeting later to just follow up with everybody. And the responses have been great. We did an employee survey. Our employee survey results went up, which if you're in a company that does employee surveys, we do them every 3 years. So we did instead of waiting 3 years, we decided to do a survey sooner because COVID was so disruptive. So we did one kind of right when COVID started and one 2 years later, and our results went up. So that's like an important measurement in my organization. And we were able to improve it by talking about something that has nothing to do with IT.
That's awesome. So did you share it with the rest of the company as well? Or was it
yeah, and as you can imagine, you start sending this out to a couple of people. I didn't like blast it out to everybody. And they're like, oh, okay, thanks. You know, because it's to them,
right?
It's just an email with a PowerPoint.
Right.
Even though you have a story and you say, hey, man, this has been super impactful for us. How do you relay that to someone outside your organization?
Right.
You'd really have to sit down and talk to them. And I haven't gone that far. Yeah. I've just been like, hey, this is what we did. It's been amazing for us. It's been important. This is something everyone's struggling with. And I really had doubts along the way that it really was burnout. Even when we were in the middle of the exercise, I was still like, man, I just think this is a couple of people maybe being lazy, traditional. They've just detached themselves. They're not motivated by work anymore. And then to finally get those, to not give up and do it anyway, even though I wasn't sure it was working. Right. Even though they had called me and said it was working, I still wasn't sure I saw a change in anybody. And then to get those survey results, which just came in this week. And we're like, wait a minute, this was all totally worth it. Because that's a huge measurement of my success as a leader. That's one of the key ways my leadership team measures me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great news. So that's something that that just about anybody can look up and share at work very quickly. Any other themes that are kind of rumbling around?
We did something amazing this year, and we went and got ISO certified. And you're like, dude, that's boring, but it's not. All right, so we got certified for what's called 27001, which is a cybersecurity certification.
Okay.
And the reason we did that was not necessarily to improve our cybersecurity, although it ended up doing that because it's the most rigid certification in cybersecurity that exists for an organization to go get.
Right.
But it was so we could show our clients that, hey, a third party has come and actually measured us against best practices, where if something like a SOC 2 or another type of framework is not an actual certification. Mm-hmm. They're just measuring you basically against you do what you say. But they don't make sure that what you say you do is industry best practice. ISO is the only one that goes further than that and says you do what you say and what you say is industry best practice. And so we spent, you can imagine, a bundle of time going out and getting this. But now IT can arm our marketing organization with a credential that means something and is universally understood. And they can go out and win work because our competitors don't have that certification.
Or you make the bar really high for them to
now it's like a captured market, right? If they decided to go get ISO certified, they're at least a year behind.
Right.
And if they don't do it as gracefully as we did, 2 years behind.
Right.
Or you throw a bunch of money at it, you're still 9 months behind. You can't really accelerate an audit, you know? And so we just finished that. It was probably the biggest one in my career as far as, wow, like we didn't think this was attainable when we started. And then to finally be finished and have all the audits, you had to do an internal audit. You had to have the auditors come twice. And you're like, this is not a fun process. We're actually going to do the same for what's called ISO 20000, which is service management, like ITIL. Mm-hmm. And we're going to do that not for our clients. This will just be for us to know that we are efficient operationally and that we've been measured against a standard. And we had so much success with 27001 improving our cybersecurity. And I'm like, if we can get those same improvements out of how we handle tickets for staff when they have an issue, that we're following up and we're not dropping the ball, and that we have an auditor that's going to come look at our paper trail to make sure we're actually treating our staff that we support internally as a best-in-class service center, almost as if they were an external party.
Awesome.
I think that everybody's going to be super excited about the benefits that we get out of that.
That's awesome. I'd love to have you come and speak to my DBU digital transformation class, because both of the examples that you are doing are blue ocean strategies.
Oh,
so
really?
Blue ocean strategy is something where you add functionality that your competitors don't have, and then you compete on it where they can't compete.
They can't.
Right. So you've done it both for your business and internally for yourself, which I think is a great application of that move too. So that's great.
Sweet.
Awesome. All right. So what I'd like to do now is get just a little more knowledge about who you are. So when I talk about the Growing the Next Version of You show, we're trying to do dialogue, which we'll get into later in some of the activities that you're involved in. But then also it's about full body, mind, and spirit personality, right? Yeah. So if you look back, Andy, on your past, when you were growing up and stuff, where did you grow up? What was your faith basis? Kind of where did you grow your worldview? Is the kind of the way that I'm coming to say it.
Well, it was in North Dallas, in the city. So I think it's funny when you tell someone you're from Dallas, they're like, "Oh, Richardson, Plano," and it's like, no, there's actually a real town there. And we lived in the real town of Dallas on the north side of town, which is like a suburb. Sure. And in the 50s, when those houses were built, it was a suburb. So it's not, like I wasn't an inner city kid or something like that. So are you
on the north or the south side of 635?
South of 635. So inside the loop. Yeah. It was cool. I was a latchkey.
Old North Dallas.
Yeah, old North Dallas. I was a latchkey kid, which is an awesome experience. And I wish more kids would do it. That applied today is now called free range parenting. So it's like has a name, and you're like, oh, you're a free range parent. Like you're insane that you would allow your kid to have unsupervised time. Right. I think I've been a pretty successful parent largely because I've given my kid the same thing I had, which was unstructured time for them to be creative, for them to take risks within the boundaries of acceptable practice. Sure. And they've turned out pretty great. So I grew up in North Dallas, lived there until I was 13. When I was born, my family, I'm youngest of four, were Catholic. Wow. I was baptized in the Catholic Church. Okay. No memories of ever being Catholic, but they went every Sunday. Like religion is a serious thing for my parents. Right. But at some point they went and joined the stereotypical Bible church. Okay. Non-denominational, which is not we didn't either. Outgoing and very, very extroverted. But when I was 13, we moved to Orange, Texas, which is the southeasternmost town in Texas. Yeah. Quite a culture shock. Right on the border of the Gulf. Refinery town. Louisiana. Right on the Louisiana border. Mm-hmm. And it was 20,000 people. It's quite a difference. But it turned out to be a pretty awesome place. But what church do you go to there? So we just joined them all pretty much we were there 4 years. That's good. So it coincided with me. I went to high school in Beaumont, which was the next town over. I went to a Catholic high school. Okay. And we went to the Nazarene church for a year or two. We went to the Baptist church for a year or two. We drove all the way into Beaumont, I think, and went to a church a few times. And it was like, you just sort of couldn't find your niche after being in a non-denominational church in Dallas. Mm-hmm. But it was cool to go Nazarene and Baptist, because if you know anything about the Nazarene church especially, is like super conservative, very, very non-evangelical, where like they long dresses, long hair, limited or no makeup, going out to eat on Sunday is that's a big problem. And that was like very different than the blue laws were made for them. Yeah, were made for them, and like pure, very, very Puritan almost. Yeah. And when kind of our whole Sunday was really built around where we're going to lunch as kids. You're like, where are we going to lunch? Because that was probably the only time we ate out. Sure. As a family of four. Yep. Nobody who has a bunch of kids has any money. It's like a cardinal rule. Right. But you start to appreciate the little things. I think it was probably pretty meager Chili's or something, Applebee's, We thought it was.
Our place was Monterey House. Do you remember Monterey House? No. I think they're still running Beaumont.
Yeah.
It was a chain in Houston for a long time.
You had Ninfas.
It's probably around the same branding.
Yeah. And then after that, I got back to Dallas about as fast as I could and was there 3 blocks from where I grew up. We bought a house 3 blocks from Jennifer and I, my wife.
Oh, did you really?
And so we lived in Old East Dallas for a while, which was like right next to downtown, trendy neighborhood. All the houses are 1,400 square feet. They're like this close together.
Sure.
And then as soon as we had kids, she's like, this is not working. So we ended up buying 3 blocks from where I grew up. Yeah. And we stayed there until COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And then we moved out to the country. Yeah. And we were Episcopalian for a lot of years. We were married in the Episcopal Church because we were like, at this point, we're mutts, right? I had been everything. Right. And Jennifer had grown up Catholic. And in her community, the Episcopal Church had the youth group. She grew up in Waco. Mm-hmm. That was the chill youth group. So she just gravitated towards that. And we did eventually leave and go to the Lutheran Church. We were Lutherans for 10 years in Dallas. We're Lutherans now. Definitely feels the most at home for me. And I think for her as well.
Liturgical.
Yeah, when they talk about the church history, I don't feel like they've really ever thrown away pieces of church history like the churches I had been to before. Right. Where largely the churches I had attended before said all the stuff that happened before the Reformation, you just throw that out the door. We don't need it. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of rebuilt their faith in a post-Reformation way, where the Lutherans are like, hold on, wait a minute, we still kind of consider ourselves Catholics. Right. And so we still look at all the things that we thought were good about the Catholic Church, and we draw our history all the way back to Christ. Right. And so we don't really throw away any of those. We just wanted some reforms. Right. And those were misunderstood.
Like 120 of them, that's all.
I mean, sure, you take your list, you post it on the door, and then people are upset. I don't know what the problem is, but when I look at having gone through all these different denominations, and then I come to Lutheran, I'm like, this one doesn't even run counter really to any major things that I've learned previously. Right. And I didn't have to like park one of the things that I was told was an important part of being a Christian. Right. It's like it's all allowed. And then also we can have a beer or two. Right. And that's a pretty great thing. That's a pretty great thing.
We'll have to try that out later.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think it's healthy to go to different denominations. There's a guy who wrote a book, and I can't remember his name, but he basically talks about the 7 different churches and how they formed him in his walk, and his perspective, which is I think very similar to yours, is that everybody has a part of the story, right? Right. As C.S. Lewis said, mere Christianity, right? Which is kind of like the basic parts of what Christianity is. And then there are flavors of it. And some people are really over here on the flavor and some are really over here on the flavor. But from my perspective, they're all brothers and sisters. And they just have a different address that they go to meet, on a Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I totally get that. The interesting thing about the Lutheran Church, at least the part of it that I'm a member of, is we don't accept any teaching from anybody who's not part of the Lutheran Church. Mm-hmm. So I have attended a Bible study that was not Lutheran reluctantly on a regular basis because it was good fellowship, and guarded myself against a lot of what I heard just it's a very defensive position where you're like, you are going to drop your guard because you're around other Christians. There could be something taught to you that you would normally maybe resist that you're going to accept in that environment that could lead you away from your faith or lead you away from some cornerstone of the faith. The thing I love about Lutherans it's a very black and white faith. And so if you're a personality like me that likes to try to put everything in buckets, they're like, there's good and bad. If it's not in the good bucket, it's in it. So it's kind of funny. Because my personality really resonates with I'm just not going to go to that event. It's not a Lutheran event. It's because of the buckets. I get everything in buckets. But you live in the real world, and I understand the actual world, there are no buckets. Yeah. But it sure does make me feel good to think there are, and to have the rules and the structure of my faith has me with these buckets, and I get to make order out of the world, even though the world is orderless.
Sure. And you and I both know our strengths. We've done our strength finder from Gallup, right?
Cool exercise.
One of the in my insight guide, it actually says in the definition of connectedness that I like to compare your philosophies to somebody else's beliefs and then connect them together.
Nice.
It's just the way that I'm made. So even beyond Christianity, I try to find similarities with my Hindu brothers and sisters and my Muslim brothers and sisters. The Jewish friends it's a lot easier because we have the same basic books, the beginning of it. But that way, just from a philosophical perspective, I like to find similarity to start from, and then just work in that realm. To your point on protecting yourself, I think if you have a strong understanding of what your beliefs are, then you don't have to worry about having somebody else say something that's different than what you believe. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true, and you don't have to accept it.
Yeah, and you can allow it to be said without
having
going to war about it.
Exactly.
And that's something I struggle with is having a thought I disagree with out there. I almost feel like I need to fight it, which the reality is no one really cares what I think for good reason. Right?
In the majority of the world, that's the truth.
Yeah.
Although that's not the way most people pretend to behave these days.
Well, we all love to be the center of attention and to think it matters. Yeah. But when you start to give people unsolicited opinions, you're not the good guy in that situation, even if you're right.
Right.
And my view is, hey, man, I'm right. I got the world figured out. It's black and white. Remember, I have the boxes. Right. I know the rules. I followed the rules. I've got everything figured out. I know you're wrong. But the thing I need to do is shut up about it. And for me, that doesn't come from my faith. That comes from politics. Well, and the belief that if you're not hurting someone, why in the world would I try to stop you?
Right.
And you're not hurting someone believing something else. You might be hurting yourself. Yeah. I guess we'll sort that out when we all pass away and figure out where we go.
Well, and frankly, I think that's the beauty of our form of government, right? The founding fathers were primarily Christian, but not all. Yeah. But they allowed for multiple faiths on purpose because there had been such travesties taking place in Europe with different Christian groups killing each other or holding each other down based on differences of doctrinal opinion.
So true. Yeah.
So having a pluralistic society, from my perspective, is a good thing. And then to your point, you have your personal beliefs. You don't have to share them with anybody. You don't have to go there if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But anyway, I appreciate you going there with me.
I always feel like compelled to share, and I don't know why. But not sharing your beliefs, it's almost like I'm not being genuine with someone. If I feel like I don't share that stuff. When like I said, they really probably don't care, or they care superficially.
Yeah. Well, I think people of our generation, and I'm gonna say we're in the same generation. I may be a little bit ahead of you on the generational side.
I'm technically Gen X, but I'm that little boomerang section.
Okay.
Where supposedly when we graduated high school and college, the economy was so bad we went home for a little bit.
Right.
And they called us boomerangs for a little while, and then we would relaunch ourselves into society. And that's kind of a funny thing when you look at maybe another specific generation that has failed to relaunch itself into society in some cases. Right. It boomeranged home and never left.
Right.
And we relaunched and joined Gen X, which is the most perfect generation because they don't care about anything. And that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I'm December of 34 is when I was 64 was when I was born. So I'm the last of the boomers, but I probably identify more with Gen X. And parts of me actually more with Y and Z because I think meaning and purpose matters in a big way.
Yeah.
We've had lots of conversations about that.
Well, the kids today, high school kids right now and college kids, I think are the best generation maybe walking around right now. I'm not at all worried about the future. I think maybe millennials sit between them and me, maybe a little problematic at times. But I was a coach for years, so I saw these kids work really hard. high school crew rowing.
That's right.
For 4 years.
Awesome.
And I saw kids work hard. And then I would hear on the news, of course, somebody talking head say, well, these kids don't work. I'm like, well, wait a minute. They work super hard. And I think what we've done to them instead is you say they don't work. Well, they couldn't find jobs in high school, a lot of them, at least in urban areas, where they would try to go to McDonald's or Taco Bell. There weren't as many options as I could walk. When I was a kid, I could walk in one of those and get a job in a heartbeat, summer job.
Right.
I think that's harder. I think it's harder to afford a car for basic mobility. We have elevated the price of an automobile to a ridiculous level. And then they're trying to launch a family and own a home. We've done the same thing to home ownership. We've made it almost impossible to afford a home on a limited income.
Right.
And then we're like, haha, they don't work hard. I'm like, dude, we messed the world up, and they're the ones who are struggling to live in it. And now we're blaming them for being lazy. Yeah. I don't think they're lazy at all.
So you and I've actually had a couple of times to walk through the material that I present on virtues, right? Mm-hmm. So for those that are not familiar with it, basically, if you go back to the Greeks, they had virtue ethics, and virtues have a vice, right? There's a good and a bad. Mm-hmm. So even pre-Christianity, there were other groups that were saying that there's good and bad, and as you come to find out, I'm gonna delete this. Goodness gracious, I can't get it out. As you study it, you find out that all people groups, all religions, all faith groups, all esoteric groups believe in good and evil at some level, right? So I think virtue ethics is a kind of a Rosetta Stone among the faiths, among the generations. And what I'm trying to do is reintroduce it or introduce it to the younger generations who may not have the background that you and I have from a lifetime of church or other faith-driven thing. Because I think the last study I saw, only 18% of people in the U.S. consider themselves to have a biblical worldview, which was pretty shocking to me. I didn't have any idea that it had gone that far. Probably when we were kids, or when I was a kid in college, it would have been 50% or something like that.
There was social pressure to at least say it.
That could be.
And that's gone away.
That could be. And just because you say you are doesn't mean that you're awake and in it either.
There's plenty of examples.
Yeah.
Many such cases.
Exactly. Well, so got your background. Let's talk a little bit about Hamilton. You actually made a conscious choice to move your family out of the big city. So how is that working out? Why did you do it? And what do you think the results are so far? Yeah, so we were pretty hardcore Dallas supporters, Dallasites. That was part of our identity, was living in an urban area. Sure. And it was a good urban area. And then when COVID hit, that changed very extremely rapidly. I'm sure the problems were always there and growing, but they were accelerated so quickly. And the chief problem was that the culture had changed. We had realized it had changed, but we didn't realize, we had never felt the change. We saw it, we knew it had happened, but we weren't hurt by it. Sure. And what I mean there is the county flipped from Republican to Democrat. Right. And that's a shift from an ideology that I'm aligned with to one I'm not. Right. So whether you could be someone who it shifted to be aligned with you, I don't care. That's not the point. The point is that the majority of people in my community used to sort of feel roughly about how I did about life. And then the population changed. And suddenly the majority of people around me didn't feel the same as me. Sure. But I was not hurt in any way by that. It was not a negative thing. It was just something you saw. Observation. And then when COVID hit, being in Dallas, I had a very different experience than people 5 miles north of me in Richardson. Right. In Plano. Or here. So I would talk to them and they didn't understand what I was complaining about. What do you mean? I'm like, buddy, I can go to Lowe's or I can go to Target. Everything else is shut down. And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, your town's not shut down. My town's shut down. I live in the middle of a shut down town. And for some reason, we decided all the mom and pop stores that sell the same stuff as Target and Lowe's can't be open.
And those people, by and large, have never come back. Mm-hmm. But they didn't live in our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They couldn't afford to. Right. They lived up somewhere in the suburbs, maybe in Richardson, commuted down to North Dallas, had a little burger shop. Right. Then they were forced to close it. There weren't enough government loans to keep them going, because what most of them did is they spent their own money to keep their staff paid until they ran out, and there wasn't enough PPP loans to make up for that. Right. And they went under, but they weren't your neighbors, so you didn't feel anything, and your Netflix still worked, and your Amazon packages still arrived. So I saw my neighbors for the first time not care about the plight of their fellow man in any way that I could see. Where they would put a handwritten sign out in front of a $1 million mansion that said, "We're all in this together." I can't tell you how many of those I saw. A handwritten sign in front of a $1 million house that said, "We're all in this together." Buddy, you're not in this with anybody. The people that you were in this with, the working class or whatever you want to call them, they still had to go to work every day. Right. They didn't get to stay home and watch Netflix. They didn't get to have their food delivered. They were the ones delivering your food. Right. So they were living their everyday life. The middle class, at least the entrepreneurs, their businesses were all shut down, and they lost their livelihood, what they built, which is an important thing. These people went out there, took a risk, started a business, and we shut it down. And this was not a competitor coming in and, "Oh, you needed to innovate. It's your fault for not innovating and figuring out how to make money in this market." No, we did this to them. Right. And what bothered me about it wasn't so much that we did it, it's that I never felt like anybody cared. And that's what I mean by the shift in culture to a group of folks. The majority of Dallas, I think, would have led with their hearts before, and now we're led by this groupthink. Because not only did we shut these places down, everybody acted like they liked it. But if you acted like you didn't like it, you were at least shunned, if not worse. And so I was like, man, I've got to get my family to a community that doesn't feel like that. And so we thought we were going to go to Paris, Texas. Mm. That was the idea I pitched, was, hey, when the kids graduate, because we still wanted them to have we for some reason thought the urban upbringing was like something they needed to have. Mm-hmm. So let's get them through school. When they're done, let's just move out to the country. Let's buy a big enough place where we can build a house, the in-laws can build a house, my parents can build a house, and we'll watch over them as they get older. And the kids, when they come back home from college or whatever they do, they'll have this acreage that they can play around in. Well, everybody thought I was insane. My in-laws and parents weren't on board with this idea. And then next thing I know, my in-laws have bought 20 acres in Hyco and are building a house out there. And so there was a piece of that idea that actually did resonate with them and just took a little time to germinate. Sure. And so we said, okay, well, how far away from someone can you be yet still feel you can help them on a daily basis? And we said 40 miles. Mm-hmm. So I drew a circle around Hyco, Texas of 40 miles, and I dumped the name of every town into a spreadsheet. And then I went online and I got to work. And I looked up school ratings. I looked up median income, median education, median commute to work, which doesn't sound important. But if you live in a community with a high commute to work time, there's no one at home during the day. Right. So we wanted a community with a low commute time because they would be around the community all day long. You'd run into them at the store, run into them at the hardware store. They weren't in their car going to another town. Right. We wanted to be a certain distance from a major metroplex. Hamilton's far enough away. Yeah. That would be a hard ride. We wanted to make sure we were far enough away from a metroplex, not to ever be a suburb, but close enough to be able to get to an airport because we still fly for work. Right. That's just a drop in the bucket of the amount of data. Crime rates, voting. School. We dumped all of that in. Yeah. And Hamilton was the only town within 40 miles that was always at the top of the list. Always. But the problem was this was suddenly a very hot market to move into. Mm. And so we went and we said, hey, buddy, we need 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, at least 10 acres. And what do you got? 1 house.
The one you got?
The one we went and looked at. And Jennifer, my wife, said, I will never live here. this house needs too much work.
Right.
And so we're like, well, what else do you have? And like, well, the next option was a $2.5 million winery.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, well, we don't borrow money. Like we're Dave Ramsey guys. So we'll do a mortgage, but we aren't going to borrow a bunch of money. And we were like, no, we're going to be debt free, including the mortgage. We're not going to borrow money. We have X amount of cash. What do you have? So he's like, there's one option. So we looked at our number 2 town, which was Hico, and there was a dog kennel that met those requirements that we would have to convert into something, living quarters. And you can imagine what those negotiations were like, because you're just sitting there thinking about how much work you're going to get into. So as you can imagine, those negotiations fell apart. And we're back to the only house in Hamilton. Mm-hmm. And we were like, forget about it. We're going to do it. And so we bought a place. We call it 64 Sunsets because the day we decided to leave, 64 days later, we were completely moved. Oh. So when we decided to leave Dallas, the sun only set 64 times before we were completely out. So we listed our house, sold it, bought a house, and moved in 64 days. You can't do that. Although that is the benefit of being debt free. Right. Because you're paying cash, you're dealing in cash, you don't have to go through the mortgage process. And so if someone's like, hey man, what's an unexpected benefit of being debt free other than I don't have a crushing burden of debt, which is for me was always something I struggled with, from payday loans when I was young, which you don't want to be a part of, to just credit card debt, always wanting a new car or a car, the car note. Everyone needs a car note. When we finally decided we weren't going to do any of that, the amount of stress we have in our lives is just a fraction of what it used to be. Sure. And then if you can reach a point where you don't have a mortgage either, your problems become totally different. Like your worries in this world start to be more people, which is probably better mental space to be in. Right. Your things are no longer your problem. Right. It's people, which is, man, I'd much rather focus on people than things. And so we made it out to Hico or to Hamilton in the only house we could. And it's been everything we thought it would be. So you look at that spreadsheet where we ranked it all, it really is the gem of Central Texas. And so we suddenly are in the ranching business, which that's YouTube. We figured out how to do that on YouTube and asking, and it's cool. People around there will be like, hey man, what do you need help with? Or, hey, come watch me, ban these cattle. Right. And so, I mean, talk about an amazing community. And so we moved our kids out there and everybody's had a good time and it's been awesome. And we're getting new experiences and it's all that we thought it would be, which is crazy because usually things aren't what you think they're going to be.
And they're able to play all sports.
It's a small enough school. They play everything, which has been important to me as a coach.
Sure.
Because I believe specializing in sports is a real problem for a kid. In that the kids I see that specialize in sports, unfortunately, end up hating that sport eventually. And the parent who's now totally invested in basketball, for example, right, who's now like the parent, takes on a personality of being a basketball parent, and suddenly your kid doesn't ever want to touch a basketball again. That hurts you too. And so I always wanted my kids to play everything. And being in a small enough environment where they can do that, and they're good, they have the sports they're specialists in, that they'll probably go to college and play, maybe D3, maybe D2, I don't know. But that they're good enough to probably go to the next level and play. But they still play baseball and football and basketball and track and field. And it's expected culturally of them to do that in this town.
They need the people.
They need them. And this is awesome. What you do for fun in town is you go to all the high school sports. There's no movie.
So Friday Night Lights
it's a real thing. It is an absolutely real thing. And so is basketball season. Basketball season is the best place to get a hamburger in town. If you want to know what the culture's like, where do you eat on basketball night? You go to even if you don't watch the game, you go there and eat a hamburger.
Oh, seriously.
Same with baseball. You want a great hamburger, you go to the baseball stadium. And so the whole town will be there. Half of them probably don't even care about the game. They just wanted a good cheap meal. And it's usually the parents run the concession stand and the money's going to some program that benefits the kids. Sure. It's such a tight-knit environment that you can't pretend you don't know somebody If you have a problem with someone, you got to swallow it and be nice to them anyway. And that's all the things that matter.
Which you're going to learn a little more about soon, right?
Yeah. So a small environment, I think, has benefits. We could get into that if you want. I have a lot of theories about how companies, communities, churches, how they reach a tipping point where they're too big.
Right.
And when they're too big, in fact, I'll just go into it.
Yeah.
When they're too big, what happens is they start to make decisions that are best for the organization and not for the individual. And this is true in all groups. And I don't know what the number is. I don't know. I think each company is probably different. If the founder's still there, they can, is it 1,000 employees, 5,000 employees, 10,000 employees, somewhere around there, a company starts to do things. And you as an outside observer that sees a company do something terrible are like, how can a company do that? It's because it doesn't see itself as a group of individuals anymore. It sees itself as a unique organism. And it does things that benefit the organism and not the individuals. And I think that once you're in an environment like that, then you are now subjected to the whims of the majority. And that is why I truly believe the most threatened thing in our world is an individual. You individually are a minority.
Yeah.
You are the most at-risk minority that exists, you, the individual.
Right.
Because if you put yourself in a large enough group, you absolutely don't matter.
Right. And
they will absolutely crush you to benefit the organism, the larger group.
Right.
Churches will do this. Companies I've seen do it. There's nothing harder than to work for a Fortune 500 and see the terrible things it justifies doing to its staff. And no one says a word. No one does anything. I'm just doing my job, buddy. Well, your job was terrible.
It's not personal.
Yeah. Oh, it's not personal, man.
It's just
I didn't
business.
mean it. You were on a spreadsheet and everybody that was below this line, we had to let go.
Right.
I'm like, those are human beings.
Right.
Man. Those are people.
Right.
And there's times when you have to do tough things, but it's always more personable or personal in a smaller setting.
Yeah.
And so living in a town is the same way. I'm convinced that if you're in a small enough town, that everyone is still an individual and the group is far more reluctant to make decisions that harm the individual. And that is why I think we have loved being in a small town so much, and why I love working for a private company as opposed to my previous public companies, is that they still see us as individuals, and the amount of terrible, evil things they'll do to us is very limited.
Right. Yeah, it's actually a really interesting perspective. My definition of digital transformation has changed. I add human and digital transformation on purpose, so that you focus first on the people and then on the change, right? Because the transformation is all about changing things primarily, as it's been defined in digital transformation, but people are the ones that have to implement that change. And when you focus on helping people to walk through the change, embrace the change, and that the change actually is good for them, there's a lot of ifs in that statement, right? Then they will embrace it and your transformation will be successful. Yeah. But if you are zeroing out the people aspect of the whole conversation and just making decisions on financial or value propositions, then you're in trouble. And I think that from my perspective, what you say makes sense. And I think there is some research on the size of company as to when it's best to break them up. And I think there have been studies on churches too, when, what the right size is. If I can find that, I'll share it with you. But I think it's a great perspective, and I'm glad that you found a place that you're happy with. We're going to go in a little while over to Copper Canyon. Copper Canyon is very small, right? The minimum acreage is 1 acre for a suburb of Dallas, anyway.
Yeah.
So we're trying to do the little bit of best of both worlds. Because I grew up in Houston, Arlene grew up in San Juan, Puerto Rico. So we're both kind of city kind of people like you guys were. So maybe we'll make the big leap eventually.
It's pretty great.
Yeah. Very cool. So moving out there, you also identified some opportunities in those environments, right? couple of topics I think that we could go into. The school board first of all, but then eminent domain I think is one.
Oh man, that has been a fun one. Yeah.
So why don't we go school board first, and then we can talk a little bit about
school board's easy because I think a lot of people, it's a positive story.
Yeah.
Where you can imagine the good old boy club present in any small town. Well, the problem with the good old boy club in Hamilton is they don't represent the values of the majority politically. So it's, I think 85% of the county is 8,000 people. Right. People want to know how remote it is.
Huge.
The biggest town in Hamilton County is Hamilton. It's 3,000 people. If you got to understand how absolutely stunningly remote that really is in the grand scheme of things. Right. And there isn't a big county near it. It's not like, oh yeah, but Austin's next door. Austin's an hour and a half away.
Yeah. So I live just near DFW for those of you, and it's about a 2.5 hour drive.
2 hours from there.
2 hours, something like that. At freeway speeds, and I think 75.
Yeah, it's not near anything. It's great. But you can imagine it's 85% Trump voters. So I would assume you say they're Republicans.
I would imagine.
But if you look at any of the boards, it's quite the opposite. If not 100% Democrats, it's 85%. And it's a very small group of people who are, or moderate Republicans. They'll call themselves Republicans, but they're definitely not by the policies and by the voting that you see. So it might be unfair to actually put them in a party. That might be oversimplifying it, but they're definitely out of step with the average Joe in the community. But they're all super swell people. So it's really hard to paint them as something other than positive when they're universally loved. They're just, politics are different. Mm-hmm. They see the world different. Sure. But then occasionally those politics, kind of like I said about Dallas, occasionally those politics, everybody's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is a problem. And the rest of the time, 99% of the time, everybody's like, yeah, I don't agree with them, but they're super nice and we're going to let this keep going. Well, the thing that happened for us is they put an industrial facility in our community. It's an industrial solar farm, industrial solar facility. If you've ever seen one of these, ours is 800 acres. They take 800 acres. It is big. 800 acres of grassland, beautiful grassland. They bulldoze it all flat. They fly a crop duster over it with herbicide that kills everything. And then they cover it in solar panels. And it's a sterile environment. So you took what was a beautiful part of nature, you made it a sterile environment. It's always an absentee landowner. That was our case as well. It was an absentee landowner who didn't really feel a commitment to the community. And it was made possible by, of all things, a school board, because these projects are not profitable without some sort of government incentive. And so the school board was able to give them a tax break. And the promise was that once the tax break expired, this place would be worth so much money that they'd claw back the incentive and then some. So that it was a long-term economic boom for the town if you were to allow this to occur.
That was the deal.
That was the deal.
Yeah.
Well, you can imagine what a bunch of farmers and ranchers thought about this. Is, holy cow, you just destroyed 800 acres of property. And what people don't realize, I think, is that ranchers are like the most pro-environmental people I've ever met. It's so, the stereotype of them not being that is crazy. Yeah. These are people that are like out there busting their butts to get as much out of the land as they can, and to do it in a sustainable way, because this is generational wealth for their family. Right. This land is generations of their family are going to be on here, have been on there, and are going to continue to be on there. They're highly incentivized to treat it as positively as possible. And so they were the ones who were like, what in the world is going on? And so I did a couple of social media videos about it. I did some videos on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. And it's funny, you'll go to some platforms and they'll have like 10 views. Right. And then I had 50,000 on another one. Right. And the social media is crazy.
It is.
But I did that, and it turned out that there was a huge swell of people that were really upset about this kind of destruction of this grassland. And what they saw in our case, it was a $320 billion French company that was doing this, and with our tax dollars. And so you kind of had a corporate welfare, angle. So you had a lot of people that were like, hey, what's this corporate welfare? Why are we giving these guys a big tax break? You had why are you destroying our environment? angle. So it really kind of unified kind of the extremes of both political parties, where it was like the super hardcore environmental folks were like, yeah, man, why do we destroy? And then like the super hardcore, the ranchers, the hardcore Republicans. And so suddenly I had this audience that was
the
like,
enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah, I had this kind of weird, diverse audience. And one time I go and I didn't even give a speech. I just talked to the county commissioners because they also give tax breaks for this. And I said, hey guys, you need to knock this off. And I leave the meeting and I'm cornered in the hallway by a bunch of people who are like, we need you to run for school board and put an end to these tax breaks. And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Because my view of politicians is if you were to rank human beings, whatever the lowest human being is, a politician's one rung below that one. Okay. That's my general feeling of politicians. And they just kept at me. And finally I was like, yeah, okay. And I started going to school board meetings. And then once I started to see the meetings, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of improvements that could be made in how this thing's run. Mm-hmm. And it was mostly around a real lack of transparency, where there were things occurring in these meetings that the general public had no idea what was going on. Even though they're open meetings, you could go online and read the minutes, but no one's going to do that. Right. So they were operating in the open, but no one was watching. No one was looking at them. So I would go and I'd be like, man, did you know they did X or Y or Z? And what? What's going on? And it started where there was the root of this was that disconnect between these board members and the general public. They didn't have the same values as the people that were voting for them. And so I just threw my hat in the ring and I did it with memes.
I've seen that.
I did it with memes. I did it with social media videos. I did it with positivity, talking about, you remember that spreadsheet on why I moved there? Right. I just unpacked the spreadsheet for everybody. I said, you live in the greatest place that a human being can live in. Why don't we protect it? And I was running, there were 3 seats open. I was running against 7 people. And everybody's like, Andy, this is the first time we've ever seen a political sign in a yard for school board. Your sign was the first sign we've ever seen ever in this county for school board. It's not true. There were 2 signs last school board. I remember seeing 2 signs last school board run. But I had 70 of them out in this tiny community. And then all of a sudden, one of the guys I'm running against has at least 50 signs out. Yeah. And then next thing I know, all 7 people have signs out.
So you raised the bar.
Yeah. None of them use social media though, and they should have. But these were 7 people that had name recognition, and I had none because we had just moved there a year and a half before.
Right.
And this is you can imagine a rural, tight-knit community. They're not just going to vote for a dude that just moved there, especially from Dallas. Oh, this Dallas guy, right? Because they're a little skeptical of people from Dallas. Yeah. And so to overcome all of that, what we ended up with was 6 people who had decades, if not generations, of exposure to this community that I was running against. Amazing name recognition for all of them. Everybody knew who they were, where they worked, everything about their parents and all that kind of stuff. And then this weird guy from Dallas that's been yelling on the internet. And what ended up happening was the best known guy there won the top spot by a good margin. Great guy, by the way. Great guy. And then places 2 through 4 were separated by 8 votes. 8. And I was 3rd. I was the last seat approved, like that got a seat.
Right.
And the 4th place guy was only 3 votes behind me.
Right.
The 2nd place guy was 5 votes ahead of me. She was 5 votes ahead of me. She's great too. All 7 of them actually are great human beings. But again, that's not the problem. The problem isn't that any of these are bad people, or the problem is that any of these are disliked people. It's again that disconnect. And so somehow I found my way on the school board through social media, yelling about corporate welfare. But now the opportunities ahead of us are more around accountability and transparency, and having someone on the board who can be like, hey, did you guys even know this was happening? And so I think it's going to be very little of my term, it's a 3-year term, is going to be anything about corporate welfare. It's going to be about day-to-day accountability and taxpayer. No one ever talks about the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's what a school board is. Right. Is it's the only connection a taxpayer has to this entity. And none of the money the entity has is theirs. It's our money. So why don't we go make sure they're treating it, correctly? and my kids are in school there. So could we just like make sure this is still a quality education and continues to be? It actually is a very highly rated high school.
Yeah.
We can make some improvements elsewhere, but there's a bundle of things that every school struggles with that we struggle with. And so it's just funny to run as a firebrand, like the dude, like I tried to keep it positive, but really people were like, he's the only one on the warpath for solar farms. And that's what got me on. And it's funny too, because it's a super conservative environment, but I was running against corporate welfare, and aren't Republicans stereotypically like love corporate welfare, right? Well, no, we don't. So it's cool to resonate with very conservative people about an issue that actually isn't traditionally thought of to be a conservative issue. And that's just how complex politics is, is that the Republicans actually in the state house are just now voting to extend this program that allows for these tax breaks. $31 billion is what they awarded over a 10-year period. Wow. These, not our school board, but all school boards. $31 billion in the state of Texas. You pay that bill because the state of Texas funds each kid a base amount equally.
Right.
It's a crazy formula. But when a school board gives a tax break, the state of Texas makes that up so that each kid gets basic funding. So it's an insane way to shovel your tax dollars out the door. And it just makes people really upset when they start to learn how the formula works and how to unpack it. And so it was cool to take an issue that really is not a Republican issue, get a bunch of Republicans up, on your side about it, and then go win a seat. But the reality of everyday office is going to be very different.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing the sustained social media campaign that you will likely do as you continue to identify opportunities to serve. Yeah. Finally, why don't we talk a little bit about 64 Sunsets? You talked about it a little bit.
Yeah.
You're growing goats and cows and chickens.
Yeah, and we didn't know anything about any of that.
And so you made it up as you went. I've come and learned a lot about chickens. That's one of the things that I want to do in my new property.
Yeah, they're awesome.
But the goats is kind of the crop, if you will, that you're really primarily focusing on. So how long until you start harvesting? I don't know. What is the language for?
Well, you process an animal. And the crazy thing about processing is we shut all the processors down during COVID, and they still have not unwound from that backlog of animals.
Really?
Yes. And so it takes a year to get a date for an animal.
Wow.
And for a goat, a year is way too long. Like you would birth a goat and have it processed maybe 6 months. You would definitely not wait a year.
So is there an opportunity to create
for millions of dollars? Yeah. Yeah, you can build a processing plant, but you can build a local, not certified processing plant for probably a couple million. You could get a state certified plant for a few more, and then a USDA would be more than that. It's a hard way to make money.
So there's a backlog because the animals were not slaughtered during the time.
Not as many, yeah.
Interesting.
And we still haven't unwound from that. And there's just not enough processors. It's how you would describe that problem.
Okay.
But we went out there, and it's really a homestead. I mean, it was like I was trying to talk to my wife about what do we want to call this place. I was like, it's really a homestead. A homestead is an agriculture environment that only consumes its own products. It doesn't sell them. Once you sell $1,000 a year, the USDA calls you a farm. And a ranch is simply a farm that their crop is livestock instead of something in the ground. The USDA actually doesn't define a ranch, really. It's not a thing. It's farms, but that's basically what it is. And so I was like, hey, our place is really small, and we're really a homestead. You want to call it what? Something homestead. And she's like, no, I like ranch. I was like, oh yeah, we'll do it. And it's a almost controversial thing because it's a small place, and there are ranchers who have thousands of acres.
Sure. And
are like, well, you're not a real ranch. And here's the funny thing about that. So we're a hobby ranch because it's not our primary source of income.
Sure.
If somehow we were able to squeak by, it wouldn't be a hobby ranch, but it is solely because we have jobs. Town jobs is what they call them. They call it a town job. Your off ranch income is called a town job. And so we have a town job. So our primary income is that. So whatever we make here is just for fun. It's just a hobby, which is great. I love it. But 40% of the beef produced in the U.S. comes off of hobby ranches. And hobby ranches are the only market that's growing against the top 1% of producers, which are these, you would think, stereotypically feedlots, these large producers. The real ranchers are rapidly losing market share year after year because 1,000 acres is not enough to be a profitable ranch unless you're somewhere where the grass is amazing, and then you can't afford the land because everyone's going to want to live there. And so these real ranchers who sometimes kind of take offense to these hobby ranchers like me, they're disappearing very rapidly. And so their problem is not me. Their problem is primarily legislation at the federal level and the fact that we don't label beef that's imported into the U.S. And so if you go to Walmart and you buy ground beef, it's from Brazil. It's not a U.S. product. And we can't compete with Brazil because of how they treat their animals. It is a factory. They're treated very poorly. We can't, no one in the U.S. would treat an animal like that for very long, at least. And so if you want to treat an animal well, like we're primarily organic and grass-fed. We just don't get certified because that is, for an operation our size, it would not make sense. It just wouldn't make sense to go get the USDA certification. And there's a few things that organic, for one, is not really good at. And one of those is cattle have flies. They don't seem like much, but they can be a terrible nuisance. A nuisance to the point that an animal will lose weight. And you need your animals to gain weight. So we use a chemical to get rid of flies. It's the only chemical we expose them to because there's not an organic fly control that works. I've tried them all. If someone wants to claim there is, that's great. I've tried it. It didn't work for me.
So that earth that you put in the chicken.
The diatomaceous earth is more lice, mites, stuff on the ground. So you could cover them in it, but they can't inhale it. There's downsides to have. So it's like, I'm not going to go cover a steer in diatomaceous earth. He's going to inhale it and get sick. And so we use a chemical for that. And then we are entirely grass-fed, except for 0.5% of their diet is what's called a wheat middling, which is a byproduct of wheat. And what we do is we give them in the months where we're not growing grass, instead of bringing a bunch of hay in, we bring in alfalfa that's been pelletized. And alfalfa is a legume; it's not a grass, but it's like the complete superfood for livestock. Alfalfa is awesome, super expensive, and so we only use it when we have to. But ours is in pellet form, so we can store it long term. And in order to keep it in pellet form, they have to bind it with a wheat middling. So they're not grass fed because 0.5% of their diet is from. And so you can see how complicated this gets. And so now I have to go convince a consumer to buy my product that's not exactly grass-fed and not exactly organic, not certified, and you're going to pay a huge premium to do business with me because it is super labor-intensive to raise an animal in a grass-fed organic environment. And so will a consumer pay $15 a pound for ground beef? A few, but not many. Goat, $19 a pound for goat. You've never even had goat. Or if you've had goat, you didn't like it. But if for me to make sense, it's $19 a pound. Are you going to pay $19 a pound for a pound of protein? Probably not. But that's what it takes for a U.S. producer to be profitable.
Very cool.
At least on a small scale.
Awesome. Well, I'm learning a lot by following you and talking with you about all these things that you're learning.
It's cool.
So that's awesome stuff. So I really appreciate getting to know you a little bit better. I know that our audience will have gotten to know you a little bit better. So hopefully some of those folks from Hamilton will enjoy getting to know you better. And I've learned a lot in our conversation today. I appreciate you coming out to Dallas all the way from Hamilton. And then maybe after you've been on the board for a little while and have some more stories of your exploits, we can get back together and check out where you are and your journey as a new politician.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thanks very much for coming out. Appreciate you doing so.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, it has.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, y'all. See you soon. Bye-bye. Perfect.
Yeah, that's good.
What I learned to do as soon as I end. Hello, friends. I'm finally writing a book to codify the basis for my signature Mike Rochelle and Associates Corporate Leadership Accelerator course. And I need an upvote from you to gain favorable publishing status. It is co-titled Growing the Next Version of You, the LeadershipN Accelerator, a journey for growing success in life, love, and leadership. Greetings and welcome to the Growing the Next Version of You show. Every week or so, I get together with thought leaders and we talk about the trends that are happening in the world, and we think of life from a mind, body, and spirit perspective, because that's what servant leaders do. So join me